Okay, can I just say welcome to this, the 6th stop on your tour today. And I'm going to be focusing on some of the environmental challenges associated with dairying and specifically looking at how nutritional approaches can be used to tackle these. In terms of the environmental challenges, well, probably don't need to, if you're a dairy farmer, need to really say much about them. With phosphorus, with ammonia, with greenhouse gases, all key environmental challenges. In terms of phosphorus brought onto farm and feed and fertiliser, and we have typically a surplus of 11 kilos of phosphorus per hectare per year in Northern Ireland. That means we accumulate about 11 kilos of phosphorus on each hectare of land each year. Phosphorus gets washed off into rivers and causes eutrophication. Last year, Northern Ireland and Lough Neagh made global headlines whenever the algae bloom could be seen from space. It's a real challenge and one we need to address. Then we've got ammonia. Ammonia is produced from nitrogen in feed and fertiliser. So I'm going to focus on the feed side. We've got an issue in that dairy cows utilise nitrogen relatively inefficiently. Only about 30%, if even that, of the nitrogen a cow consumes actually goes into milk. Most of the rest is excreted in urine and the faeces, and whenever the two of them mix, ammonia gas is produced. That ammonia goes into the atmosphere and ends up being deposited on sensitive habitats and causes loss of biodiversity. And then we've got greenhouse gases. We know of carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide you'll hear about later on, and methane, which is what I want to speak about today. So methane is really just produced by a natural process in the rumen, as you'll be aware, but it is a key greenhouse gas and is contributing to climate change. The potential impact of climate change, I think we're probably all becoming increasingly aware of that as we see just how climate has become so unstable recently. So how do we go about tackling these problems? Well, there are a number of approaches. Firstly, we can improve efficiency. And as you go around today, you'll be hearing lots of people, or there'll be lots of boards on how to improve efficiency, reducing calving age at first calving to 24 months, etc. And Marco will have talked about some of that as well. But the approach I want to say a little bit about is nutritional approaches. How we can use nutrition to reduce the losses of phosphorus, ammonia and greenhouse gases. So I'm going to start off with phosphorus, and dairy cow concentrates contain about 5.5 grams of phosphorus per kilo. Some of them contain a bit more, some a bit less. We're maybe not quite sure exactly what concentrates in Northern Ireland contain, because it's something our feed industry doesn't actually declare. But we know we need to reduce this level further. The question is that possible? Can we feed concentrates containing lower levels of phosphorus? Well, to answer that question, I need to go back to research. It was done quite a number of years ago, but it's research that's still absolutely relevant for our industry today. It was a 4-year study where we fed cows either a high phosphorus diet, sort of typical of what the industry is feeding at that stage, or a low phosphorus diet. We fed it over 4 years, which is the longest term study that's ever been undertaken across the world on phosphorus levels for cows. The results of that are just highlighted here, some of them, and you can see that dry matter intake, milk yield, the bars are the same. We reduced the amount of phosphorus really considerably in these diets, and we had no impact on intake, milk yield, fertility, health of these cows. So it's certainly possible to reduce phosphorus level in dairy cow diets. I'd suggest in most situations we can reduce the amount of phosphorus to between 4.6 and 5.2 grams of phosphorus per kilogram. In some situations we can even go lower than that. That has the potential to reduce the phosphorus surplus in Northern Ireland by about 300 to 600 tonnes per annum. You might think that's not very much, but if you think of a 1 tonne bag and think of 600 of them laid out in this field, that's the amount of excess phosphorus we can take off farms in Northern Ireland just by reducing the amount of phosphorus in the concentrate. Action is needed now. I think we're just waiting for warm weather to come again, and the expectation is that the phosphorus bloom on Lough Neagh is going to return. So this is phosphorus is a really key challenge. The next one I want to look at is ammonia. And we know that ammonia can be reduced by feeding lower protein diets to dairy cows. Typically, the research would show that if we reduce the amount of protein by 1%, we'll reduce ammonia emissions by about 10%. Now, some of our research has shown we can reduce that by more. Others have shown that we get a slightly lower reduction. But in general, that's what we do expect. So reducing protein levels will reduce ammonia emissions. But what is the impact of those low protein diets on cow performance. And that's an issue we've been looking at here at Hillsborough over the last 3 or 4 years in a major project. I've just got the results of one of those studies up here, looking at fat plus protein yield. And in this study, we fed diets containing either 15, 16 or 17% protein, and we looked at performance in early lactation and late lactation. You can see here that in early lactation, the blue lines, the bars are all the same. There was no impact on performance whenever we fed low protein diets in early lactation. Surprisingly, in late lactation, we found a slight reduction in fat plus protein yield with the 15% protein diet. Not what we were expecting, but that's what we found. We're not quite sure if that was due to these cows performing better, or these cows performing better, or these cows performing poor, or these cows performing better because they were overfed protein, and that can happen. But the key message here is that a total diet crude protein of 16% is certainly possible for Northern Ireland farmers, and some people are actually there. If we go to what the Netherlands are doing, they're probably lower than that with maize silage-based diets. The key thing here is we need to move away from crude protein to focus on metabolizable protein. And if you're not aware of metabolizable protein, it's really saying the actual amino acid requirement of the tissue rather than just crude protein, which is a really sort of vague term. So we need to formulate diets correctly, and we can certainly reduce protein levels. The last area I want to just touch on here this morning is methane. And the question again is, can we reduce methane production from cows? I've said it's a natural process, it's what ruminants do, so can we actually address that? Well, probably Marco Winters has already been talking this morning and may have already said that we can select cows that produce lower levels of methane, and that's absolutely true. What I want to really look at here is how nutritional approaches can reduce methane, and it's an area we're really actively involved in here in AFBI at present. We know we can reduce methane by feeding higher quality diets, so if we feed more concentrates, we'll reduce the amount of methane cows produce. But bear in mind what I've already said about phosphorus. The more concentrates we bring on our farms, the more phosphorus we bring on. So that's not the ideal approach, also due to the cost. Improving silage quality, if we reduce the amount of fibre we feed to our cows, then again we can reduce methane. And I think we can always argue in terms of improving forage quality. But really the one I want to touch on here is the use of feed additives, and I've listed 4 of them up here. Some of the names may be familiar. If not, I suspect over the next coming years they will increasingly be so. The one that's probably got the most press is 3-NOP or Bovaer. And it has been shown to reduce methane emissions by, on average, around 30%. Very effective additive for reducing emissions. Then we have another product called Silvair, which really contains nitrates, and again, it's been shown to, on average, reduce emissions by about 20%. There are a range of essential oils, most of them from plants, that again we can feed, and again they can reduce emissions, not as effective, typically 5 to 10%. And the other one, which again you may have heard research on, is seaweed, and it's been in the press recently, especially our work with Queen's, where we feed seaweed and we can reduce emissions from that. Asparagopsis is one of the sort of the main seaweeds that's used. There are still lots of unanswered questions in terms of using these inhibitors to reduce methane production. But I believe it is something that the industry is going to have to face within the coming years. We are hoping we have funding in place to start looking at some of these products on local farms, and we're also looking for additional funding from DARE for long-term studies to look at using these in dairy cow diets. Just really to finish off and to sum up, and maybe I'm probably stating the obvious with this in terms of the key message, pressure to reduce the environmental impact of dairying is only going to increase. If you look at what's happened over the last 20 years, that's been the direction that we've moved. We started off with nitrates, then with phosphates, then with ammonia, then with greenhouse gases. The pressure is only going to increase, and it's going to, if you're a dairy farmer, it's going to impact you more and more in the future. The good news is that there are lots of ways in which we can address some of these issues, especially through nutritional approaches. And I believe that as the industry goes forward over the next decade, increasingly the sort of areas I've been highlighting here are going to be adopted more and more on farms. Just to really highlight and finishing off, this research has been funded by a number of funders. We have Department of Agriculture, who obviously funds most of our research here. But then we've had some of our local feed companies who have been realising this is a key issue and have been putting in funding to support this research. Agri-Research as well, the Farmers Levy, is supporting what we do, and with strong links with Queen's and Chuggas. So a lot of people putting funding in to address these issues.